Anyway, let's move on to the paper. What have we got for you? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the fact that the oil giant BP just posted the biggest profits in its history, £23 billion. And it's just the latest in a series of stories. You probably think you've heard it before, because there has been a series of stories about increasingly record-breaking profit for BP, Shell, other oil giants, who all seem to be doing very well at the moment. Now, normally, Ben, when a company posts massive profits, it's because they've had a technological breakthrough, they've invented a new process, created a new product, perhaps, that solves a major problem for millions of people. So presumably all this extra money is because BP's found a way to make energy out of clean air and it doesn't harm the environment in any way, yeah?
Not quite like that. Of course, what's happened is the war in Ukraine has sent gas prices through the roof because everyone started to wean themselves off Russian gas. Not that the UK was using much of it to start with. And BP, because the price of gas and to a lesser extent oil had gone so high over the past year, although it's fallen back wholesale prices in the past few weeks. BP and others, such as Shell, the fossil fuel giants, they've reaped these huge profits. And of course, on the one hand, well, it's good, isn't it? It's a British company is making lots of money. On the other hand, well, we're paying for that. So the point that, this is a windfall of war, as Labour have called it, the spoils of war, it is going to cause a lot of anger. And we've seen calls yesterday and again this morning for a bigger windfall tax on big fossil fuel firms, so that when they're making these extraordinary profits, and they are extraordinary profits, £23 billion in a year is humongous. But when they are making these huge profits at our expense, because it's us who've had our energy bills soar over the past 12 months, that they should pay more in tax, perhaps to ease the cost of living crisis on British families.
It could be used for lots of other things, couldn't it? Now, get into questions, everybody. What do you think? Do you think it's perfectly reasonable for BP just to have capitalised on an opportunity, as any business might do? Do you think that they're chiselling the customer? Do you want some of your money back via the tax man? Get into the comments and let us know. Perhaps you're avoiding all BP petrol stations. Now, BP said it did expect to pay £1.8 billion of corporation tax to cover the last year, which isn't a tiny amount. And it said the North Sea arm of its business, the UK-based bit of exploration, was actually, less than 10% of its company profits that it amounted to. And the government, to be fair, already takes about 75% of profits from oil that's dug out in the North Sea. So that all goes to the Treasury. And there's a lot of pension funds, too, that are invested in these oil giants, and they get higher dividends as a result. So BP, if they were here, Ben, would tell us, look, the more profits they make, the better it is for us in some ways, if you have a private pension pot, and if you think the Treasury taking 75% out of the explorations in the North Sea is enough. But I think the issue here, isn't just the fact that there's this exploration in the North Sea that they tax quite high. It's the total worldwide profits of a British company, which we're not getting all the tax from.
That's right. So BP, as I understand it, is taxed on the profits it makes in the UK, and it is taxed. So there's the corporation tax rate that companies pay, but then there's an additional tax on North Sea providers, North Sea giants. And then on top of that, there is the windfall tax that was announced last year, reluctantly initially by Rishi Sunak as Chancellor. He was sort of forced into it by public opinion, Tory backbenchers, and credit to the Lib Dems, because they were actually first out of the blocks to call for a windfall tax, and then Labour followed. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not these calls for an extra windfall tax for BP, Shell, and others to pay even more, whether they're heeded in the coming days. Because, getting up this morning, it's damn cold outside, isn't it? It's very hard frost, there's a lot of fog. It feels cold. We've had to have the heating on because, not as a luxury, not because we're all sitting around in our shorts, t-shirts, bikinis, because it's actually really cold. So when you're putting the heating on, when you're seeing literally on your smart meters how much you're spending on your gas to heat your house each day, and then you see the front page of our newspaper today saying that BP's made £23 billion, it does make you think, doesn't it?
It does. Unfortunately, the only thing I can really think of is you in a bikini right now, which is maybe just my problem rather than anybody else's. Now, strip bare, possibly not a real name, says, so we pay more for companies to make more. As capitalism working for you? LOL. Yes, I suppose it is in some way. Get into the questions. What do you think? Do you think there is any kind of justification for these profits? Do you think that BP is being taxed properly or enough? They are putting billions in. Does that work for you? Leslie says, why are they allowing this amount of profiteering? I suppose there's a technical question here, Ben, about the amount of regulation that the government is able to exercise on the cost of energy. And via Ofgem, of course, they've allowed these prices to rise, but capped them at a certain level for a bit. And then that cap's coming off. And it's quite technical. But we've got Ed Miliband at the bottom of that spread talking about Labour's windfall tax plans. And of course, Rishi's windfall tax that he imposed, some people may not have noticed, is because, according to Labour, it was too weak and it wasn't the one they suggested. So what's the difference? What would Labour do differently? Would they be able to stop these price rises, or would they tax it more? What would be the solution?
So what Labour has suggested, and this Ed Miliband op-ed at the bottom, it doesn't go into a huge amount of detail about what they would do. But as I understand it, they would increase the windfall tax and use some of that money, if not all of it, to bring bills lower again. So the government, I mean, you may remember back under Theresa May, it was announced there'd be an energy price cap. So you wouldn't pay more than, I can't remember what it was now, it was about £1,300 a year, which now seems like, wow, was that?
£1,300 a year! Oh, happy days.
By the time it came in, she was out of office. So Boris Johnson, I think, was Prime Minister when the energy price cap came in, and then that was superseded by other mechanisms to try and keep bills low. But the problem the government has, of course, is each time it says we'll cap the bills at X, and it's not everyone's bills, remember, because it is still a case that if you use more energy, you will still pay more. It's average price cap, so most of us won't pay more than the cap that is set by the government, but some people will. And if if you are, not to conjure up again an image of me in my bikini, Susie, but if you are sat around with all the windows open, all the lights on, the radiators on in every room, and you are just there in your smalls, well, then you will pay more, quite rightly. So there is, and the energy price cap is due to change again in the coming months.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Wear a bikini when you've got a cold. It would not help you. It would not help clear your chest. The other issue, of course, is people like me that are out in the sticks. You're not on the gas mains, and we have to pay for heating oil. And that has not really had any protection from the government price cap. And if you've bought it at the wrong time or the right time, there's not really any government help. And my oil this year was about 3 times what it normally is. And that's, I have to pay it. I don't have an option. There's no other way to heat the home. So it does, the cap doesn't help everybody. But here's the kick. Down in the bottom left of that page, it says that 1 in 4 homes will feel recession-like misery, even if the UK manages to avoid a technical recession. So 7 million households are going to feel a very serious pinch, which is quite a lot of voters, Rishi, if you're watching, or indeed Mr. Looney from BP, who's pictured on that page. But
I was at that briefing yesterday by the National Institute for Economic and Social Research that led to that story. And on the one hand, they were saying, this is good news because we're going to avoid a recession. They're the first big number crunching organisation to suggest that the UK might narrowly avoid a recession. But that's only technically, because a recession, it's technically defined as 2 consecutive quarters. So that's 2-3 month period, so 6 months of negative growth, right? I.e., economy going backwards. So what they were saying yesterday is that technically Britain might not cross the threshold into a recession, but we might bump along with an average growth this year of, get this, 0.2%.
Oh, well, crikey. But
because so many families, because of the cost of living crisis with price rises, inflation is 10.7% at the moment, outstripping average wage rises, it will still feel like a recession because you'll have less disposable income. You won't be able to afford 20 quid for a Chinese on a Friday night because you've been paying for your gas, because you've been paying for electricity, because the food bills have gone up for your weekly shop. So even if Britain technically avoids it, for 7 million people, it won't feel like that.
No. And if people feel that they're in a recession and the government comes on the air and says, there's no recession, don't worry about it, I don't think that's going to work quite.